another episode of Connecting Conversations. I'm Carla Adebekin, and you are. Say who you are.
Okay, calm down. I'm Evelkah Powell, your host, co-host.
You can tell which one of us takes it more seriously than the other, potentially. I don't know, but I think it's probably you.
To an extent.
Yes. Okay. This is an exciting topic. This is one of the episodes involved with our relationship series. And this was actually kind of your idea about we want a relationship series for this year. Why was that important for you?
I think it's because our whole life is filled with relationships. Like no matter where we go, who we connect with, what environment we're in, we're kind of, I don't want to say we're forced to make relationships, but in a sense, the way the world and society is set up and us as humans, we can't live without one another, essentially. And I think it all boils down back to forging really healthy, positive relationships with the people around us. So I think, we can't talk about life without talking about relationships. So we can't talk about, for instance, D and I without talking about relationships. We can't talk about work life without relationships with our colleagues, our leaders. So it all boils down, I can't speak now, to relationships and forming those, but also being able to say no to some relationships as well, and knowing when to put the boundary up, or knowing when to leave a particular relationship as well. So I think it was just something that I felt was necessary. We don't talk about enough. We like to talk about ourselves and us as individuals, but how do we cooperate and work together and connect with one another? I think we need to lean more into that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I like that. I think when you raise this to me in terms of, I'd like our content to really focus on some of this year.
Yeah.
Because it's within that space that I think we underestimate how much influence that has on so many of the outcomes that we want to see going well, generally just as a whole individual.
Yeah.
But in order for that to go well, we need to have whole relationships. We need to, I think about just historically speaking, if I look back when I've had negative experiences with managers in the past, I hated kind of just like the way that I was feeling going into work, which is where I spent most of my time.
100%.
That would then infiltrate into how I treated people at home and people in my friendship circles. Like my constant demeanor was defined by such a negative experience that I was encountering day in and day out. So when you brought this to me, I was like, you're absolutely right. We need to really elevate the importance of how we are reflecting and how we're being very consciously intentional about how we are navigating relationships in all of the ways that they
100%.
impact our lives. Not, we get so used to the glitter or the sense of like romance, male, female, or romantic relationships. Like this is so much more than that. So much more than that. And that's where so much of our sense of value is going to come through. And I know not just in terms of your sense of self-worth or affirmation when you have good community or you have good engagement, but actually, how am I as a human being functioning? And my relationships will really impact that space. And also through really good positive relationships, people want to work with you in a professional sense.
Yeah.
This is where opportunities come through. You want people to, like, I remember this person, I love their work ethic. They had a real great sense of integrity. They bring so much skill, but our relationship is so good. I cannot wait to recommend them to someone else.
And I think I've had that, fortunately, in organizations that I've worked in where, even when I've exited that company, I've still maintained really solid relationships with people from those organizations, to the point where I'm given opportunities to work with them or, been able to make long lasting friendships. And I think it's so important. And I talk about this in some of my own content, is around building bridges rather than burning them. And I think that is the essence of how we should be approaching the topic of relationships, the journey of relationships with one another. How are we building up each other rather than tearing each other down? And I think it's so important that we look at it that way, because if we think about the bridges in itself, it's to help us to get to the other side.
Yeah.
It's to help us to move forward. It's to help us to move ahead. And we can't do that on our own.
I think that's so interesting. And I think that's like highly countercultural if you think about it. Like any kind of story or stereotype that I've heard about, living in corporate, it's dog eat dog. You're standing on someone else's shoulder, but what you're saying right now is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And like people are beginning, I think, to realize how important that is, because we are burning out.
Yeah.
We don't like, we find ourselves alienated when we've not had good connections like that in the workplace, or we've not been good leaders where others have been under our care or under our responsibility in a professional sense. Where have you seen, like, for yourself?
Yeah.
I'm gonna dig into Evelkah's world right now. I'm so excited about that. And you've had your own long journey with, relationships in corporate, and you're still incredibly young. Evelkah's still in their 20s. Look at this. That's what I'm dealing with out here. We will not talk about that, maybe. It's just putting myself in a hole. But you're in your early 20s, but you've done...
Not in my early 20s.
I would say in my world, you're not even... Yes, you are. You are. You're not even in, like, you're just in mid-20s. I don't even want to hear that.
I don't know what
you're talking about. Anyway, we digress of the purpose of what we're talking about. You've had quite an extensive, varied experience with corporate. Like, do you want to share where you've seen, like, your first interactions with corporate relationships, how you felt you had to navigate them, and how through that experience you grew in confidence to kind of get to the space where you are now?
That's a really interesting question.
I do try, yes.
Someone cover her. But I think if I think about my first job, my first corporate job, after leaving university, it was working within the corporate space, and I was around, how old was I? Probably around 19-ish, and I didn't know what to expect. In all honesty, I didn't know what to expect. I thought you go in there, do a really good job, work hard, find solutions to things, and then you reap the rewards of it. So I took that approach. Luckily, it worked for me. I would consider myself to be a hard worker, but I also, and I talk about this a little bit again on LinkedIn. If so, follow me. Around playing the game, and I don't say that in a negative sense. I think it's more in the sense of observing your environment and working within that environment, because then you understand how to operate. You understand
great outcomes.
For great outcomes, you understand the tricks. You understand how to kind of find solutions to certain things, and so on and so forth. So I was very observant within that organization, and I found ways. And I think I was naturally a leader, so I just found ways that I could capitalize on, projects that I could work on where I can prove that I can do this and I can do it well. And some things came more naturally than others. So using my own skill set, my understanding, the observations that I was having, I kind of pulled that all together. And as a result, I learned really quickly who would be able to help elevate me as a person and help me to grow in my career. And I found those people and I connected with them, and I stayed close with them because I said, if they can help me elevate, if they also have value that can be contributed to my value, it's a win-win situation. And therefore I'll be able to kind of learn from them in a way that would allow me to grow even further than people who just sitting in a job just for the sake of sitting in a job. So that's the approach I took. And when I had to leave that company because I was then moving to a different town, I couldn't stay with this company, unfortunately. I remember having to speak to my manager, and she started crying.
Wow.
And I was sitting there like, are you okay? Is this a thing? And it dawned on me in that moment that this was also a relationship for her that she felt really connected.
It was a mutual beneficial.
It was mutually beneficial for both of us. But we had developed a connection so much that her loss of me leaving the company and me as an employee made her upset. And it's quite interesting in a way, because we don't realize how we can impact people around us just by our presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thrived and strived to be a person that will have a positive impact on others and be able to support others anywhere I could. So I think me taking that approach really allowed me to forge really positive relationships within a corporate space that were mutually beneficial, but also in spaces that allowed us to probably have a deeper connection than the surface level. Hey, how are you? Good
We're
morning.
just here to create a purpose for an objective.
Yeah. So that's how I kind of navigate that space in the corporate world. And I just, throughout my various roles within the corporate space, I just found people, my tribe, and really stayed close with them. And I think when we think about relationships, we always think, what can we get out of it? And that's the wrong mindset to go into any relationship with. So it's like, okay, what can I get out of this? But also, what can I give?
The job, funnily enough, which is fine. But in you giving me feedback, because I'd requested for that, that's how we connected. And here we are to this day, still building a professional space, still building through that. But the connection is a lot deeper in terms of when you are, I like to call it, when people are in the trenches together in business, or in the trenches together when you're building or creating something new, particularly if you've got aligned values and vision for impact. There are so many other elements happening, and maybe we don't talk about that as much, about when we are looking to that next step in the career space, looking for that next space for, in terms of, am I in the right environment? Am I connecting with the right people to flourish all of these other elements that are going to need to be in good spaces when we get into building things, or we're under pressure to meet deadlines, or we have to produce. Like, I want to know that I'm around or surrounded by relationships in that space, that there is great compassion, that there is, everyone treats each other with a level of respect, but that the connections carry further than just, like I said, meeting the objective. Would you say that there's ever been an opportunity where, like, it hasn't gone as smoothly as you've described, or that connection wasn't there? Yeah, I said I was going there. I told you.
In the corporate space?
Anywhere. Like, you might not have even been in some of your, like, last previous roles within the workplace. It could have been even in a volunteering space, like, but you had an objective to fulfill, and it didn't go well because the relationship dynamic wasn't good.
Well, there was an organization that I worked with, and I think, looking back, I thought it was a good idea to move into this organization, because I thought it would have been a step up for me in terms of my development, in my exposure. And don't get me wrong, it did give me those things to an extent, but I went in there with an end goal as to what I wanted to get out of it. However, when I got in, it was a very different kettle of fish.
Interesting.
And the relationships, and I think before I even continue, I thought, because there were people in that particular organization that looked more like me, I thought I would have a deeper connection and I'll be connected a lot more and things like that. However, that wasn't necessarily the case.
I think that's a really interesting point to make. Like, we assuming, well, we all look the same. Surely we are aligning the same on the inside.
Yeah.
That's huge. Tell us more about that.
So when I did go into that space and I saw how things were, and the conversations that we were having, I realized we weren't aligned in any way,
Wow.
which was for me very disheartening. And I really, really struggled being in that organization because to an extent, it almost made me feel small. It almost made me feel like my voice wasn't heard, or because I had a very different um set of beliefs and understanding about certain things, but also because I wasn't experienced enough on certain things, I was kind of put on the back foot. So that I really, really struggled with, because throughout my career journey up until that point, I really thought I was accelerating, and I was forging these connections that were advantageous to me in order for me to grow and move forward. However, this organization and space that I was in at the time, it completely did the opposite. And I didn't, in the end, I made the decision to leave and move on, because it just wasn't fulfilling the things that I wanted to fulfill. And I just had to take the bold stance in saying, no, this is not what I want for myself. And, I tried it, it didn't work. And that's okay. But even in that moment, I didn't do it in a way was um that was rude, or that discredit me in any way, shape, or form. But I did it, very honorable. And I let them know, like, look, this is not working out for me, and these are the reasons why, and I don't align with this. These are my goals. So in the end, me and the same lady who I thought had no alignment to me, we ended up actually staying in touch more than anyone else. So
Wild.
it was kind of like a weird situation, because you think you're going in there to get a certain thing, but it doesn't work out the way you thought it would. But then you get something completely different, and in fact better, by just being true to yourself. And honoring a relationship even at a time where it feels uncomfortable.
That's such an interesting thing, and I think sometimes there's a hard balance with that. How do you? And I think maybe the word that I'm looking for that you'd need to kind of execute in a moment like that is discernment.
100%.
Like, is this even though it's uncomfortable and we're clashing right now, is this actually for the benefit in a good way, or is actually this is a growth opportunity? Because a lot of the time we're like, oh, our visions or our ways didn't align, but actually I may be the biggest problem there.
Yeah.
Like that's a different kind of honesty about,
Yeah.
again, how our relationships are being nurtured and what we're contributing, because it's a two-way thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. Like, am I too, and I don't like to say this, but maybe too sensitive about things? Because in a work environment, if the leadership style is just goal focused, and I feel I'm not really seen. I know now, and especially now in our conversations, we've got so much resources available. John C. Maxwell has set a huge trend for many generations now about leadership style, and how it is that as a leader, you're responsible to ensure that your team are championed. They have such confidence to try things out, because their exploration and success in that is always going to be credited to you as their leader. But I've also been in models where, like, that's not the environment that I've been in, and those relationships really, I felt myself kind of like, am I losing my ability to talk and just getting smaller and smaller and smaller? But also I'm just like, I look back and I'm thinking, was that just that person? What was the part that I played? Or I should have played in being a bit more active, been taking back some of my own empowerment. I'm only going to allow people to treat me a certain way if I let them.
100%.
And I can put that down to, I was young, didn't really know myself, trying to figure that out. And there's kind of that layer too. But I think these are the relationships that really show us, like, okay, this is what I'm like.
It's very character building.
Hugely. Like, these are triggers for me to get into this space. What am I going to do about that if I encounter that before? Because if we don't find a way to set like, not when I say the word boundaries, people always think boundaries is like you stay out there, but actually boundaries about what it is that I have done to safeguard my well-being.
Yeah.
It's actually not about them.
Yeah.
What have I put in place that I am able to function to like the most optimum opportunity in that space? So like if
do you think boundaries are a good thing or a bad thing?
I think they're a good thing. I think they're a good thing because it's more to do with I have accountability of what I'm doing with myself. I don't have to let somebody else trigger me and say, oh, they make me feel this way.
Yeah.
So I behave in this way. Like I can't.
But how do
No.
Because I've had a lot of conversations with, you know, friends, family, colleagues, and the common denominator is I don't know how to set boundaries. And I struggle to set boundaries, especially to people who I'm close to or relationships I'm really connected to. So how would you navigate that, or what would be your thoughts around that in setting those boundaries?
Those are really good questions, and I think there's different answers for those very three different places. And I think you're right, there is absolute complexity when it's like, for example, close friends or like close family. Family is a tough one. I've always said it, like your family's doing a crazy dance until a spouse joins the family and can say, I'm not dancing to this tune. And then you really see, and you don't know it because you've got yourself into, your family and yourself have got into a culture or rhythm of this is the roles that we take in these scenarios. And they're not always healthy, but you're so used to dancing like that, you don't quite know how to break it. And I think that's one dynamic to consider. And like, actually, if it's not healthy, do we really want that there? And what boundaries have I set into myself? Like, actually, my boundary is like, I want to help you, but I can help you in this way. It's learning how to say no in a way that like, it doesn't mean that you've lost my connection. It doesn't mean that we don't have a way that we could find a way to move forward, but, and also there's consequences. If the boundary is laid down and like repeatedly the one of the parties is not being respectful of it, or they continue to do things that kind of like nobody wins, you are responsible to set a new boundary of a new consequence. That's tough to do. And I would say, like, as much as I think it's more complex in those relationships, that principle I think is still at play even in our work environment, because like, okay, I'm not sure about like, I need to show my commitment, so therefore like people get to speak to me in a certain way, or roughshod over like, actually this is not respectful of my time. Like where do I put down like, well, actually I appreciate you, I respect my boss, I'm not saying in any way you violate, you know, policy and protocol in a work environment, but like, you know, when some of these relationships are clearly like passive aggressive, kind of toxic, like you are empowered to put in boundaries. Like, I've made this clear, always have a paper trail about when you're doing things.
100%.
Make sure you're in the know.
Write everything down.
If you know, also like make sure that you are aware of what your rights are in your contract, things like that. This helps to foster your sense of feeling I'm empowered everywhere. If the environment is continuously toxic, then you have to make a different evaluation and do something else. I could say like, I have been in an environment like that in work, and it wasn't just, and I would say this was the style of the leadership at the time. And I had seen the style of the leadership infiltrate so much to literally everything on the ground in this institution, which was quite big. And just how toxic that really was. And I knew like I had to be there. It was for a period of time, that it was part of me getting my qualification, so I had to be there. It wasn't like, this is a place where I'm choosing to work. It was a complex, but it was still a professional environment. I was getting a qualification through that at the time, and I had to be there every single day. Just the mannerisms, there's such a lack of like respect, like the passive aggression, and like I could see the people like had constant senses of suspicion, like who's going to tell on me this way, who can I really trust in this environment. Those relationships, like it showed me like on a very extreme scale, like how much like our relationships with each other and our teammates and our colleagues need to be in good places.
100%.
And in that environment, in the organization, the type of work that we did, it carried a lot of red tape. We were responsible for young people. You don't want to feel like, do I know that I can trust that you're going to have my back? Not because we've got poor practice, but just like there needs to be a sense of like rallying together. Like you said, you found a tribe. There's a people that they have a sense of compassion with you, knowing that they're actually facing similar challenges in the trenches of the kind of work that you're doing. but I didn't really see that. And amongst each other, and remember, I was there just for a small amount of time. There were people that were working this institution for years, and they were constantly, and you could just see like their mindset about it become so warped, and this had become the norm. And I'm like, this is unreal. Some of them signed off work, that kind of thing, and just for the feeling that they didn't feel that they were safe. It wasn't a safe environment about their psychological space was being protected, that they had a sense of allyship with their fellow colleagues. And that's the kind of extreme scenario that I'm saying, like, I need to evaluate, is this a place for me to continue on? I can't say this would be like we said earlier. I had to actually grow up in that scenario, even when it was uncomfortable. It's kind of figuring out what the difference is.
And I think that's the essence of relationships. Like, what's the difference? Like, what kind of relationship you want to forge? And I think when we think of it like that, we need to, like with any new relationship, what kind of relationship you want to establish here. Like, is it a relationship of, I will go to this person because I know they will have my back for X, Y, and Z, or I will go to this person because if I just need a listening ear and someone to rant to, that's my person. Or, is it that I just want a hug? And I think some people think that we can get everything from one person, and so we get so attached to certain people in our lives, which can be so detrimental because those people can leave at any point. Circumstances can change. Life has starts and beginnings and endings, and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think we need to, I guess, cast our net wide and realize that, look, you can get different things from different people. Like, I have different friendship groups right now. Like, some of them are single like me because we both get the war of relationships and dating. Like, we can rant and talk about that in that group. Others are married, so I know, those conversations are slightly different. I have my relationship with you. That's all over the place.
Wow. There's just no respect these days. I just have no words.
But and then I have like my family relationships, and even the relationship between my mom and my dad, that is very different in how I interact with them. So I think it's like, how intentional are you in these relationships? And what kind of relationship you want to establish it in the corporate world. If you want someone to mentor you, what kind of relationship you need to forge with them first before you ask them to become your mentor? Because a relationship needs to be there. You just can't get up and ask, oh, by the way, Luke, I would like you to be my mentor. Luke is going to be like, who are you? So, we need to be intentional about how we approach these things.
And I think it's also having the tools as to how to navigate that.
100%.
And not everybody has good interpersonal skills. And I think now we're living in a generation where this relationship conversation is becoming more and more at the forefront, and we're seeing the value of it. We're talking about it now.
Yeah.
But in terms of, like, some people are not, like, the first port of call that I would have learned about good interactions and interpersonal communication would have been maybe from family, from home. Yeah. If that's not always great, like, what do you do about that? And there's this one friend of my husband's who is a bit amazing. He just decided that he would read all of these books out of nowhere.
Really?
Just like read constantly. And some of the stuff that he was taking at that time, I think he would see it as like, this is one of his biggest moments of education. And he's like in his 30s, that kind of thing. So we think like a serious kind of amount of life has gone by. And he's had so many different types of experiences. And one of them is like the communication, I think, with one of the parents that he has is really difficult, like really, really difficult. But he'd been reading all these books about relationships.
Oh, wow.
Like huge relationships. And it's just like, and one of the things that he picked up was like, do you know what? I know that I contribute to 50% of this interaction. I have got so much control over that 50% of the interaction. And I think from what I've heard subsequently, again, this is me hearing it by, hearsay. My husband tells me, so it's not in first person. But what I respected so much was, firstly, this was a person that maybe did not get the gift of maybe having someone giving him those tools from where we sometimes would hope we would get them. Second of all, he did something about it by proactively looking to a place to receive knowledge and resource. And then thirdly, he executed it, because what I've heard is it really shifted so many amazing dynamics for close circles around him. And historically, where some of those interactions with, said family weren't going well, in his absolute execution of what he had learned, he had seen different improvements. And I think that's encouraging to know, and why I'm so passionate about us using our platform as an opportunity to really go here, because we want to amplify the level of importance and value. And also, like, there is something that we can do to change it. And it is down to us to also find ways. Go and listen to podcasts, have conversations, or join this conversation, quite frankly. Put your comments there. Share with us your experience in terms of, like, maybe it's about time I started to take stock of what's my 50%.
Yeah.
Where am I? And that could be my 50% in familial relationships, the 50% that I'm contributing to, like, social relationships, friendships, the 50% that I'm doing in my romantic relationships or life partnership relationships. And then, of course, in the wider world of corporate, like, all of these things are interplaying with each other. And I can guarantee parts of you there will be some, thread principles that are consistent through all of them. So addressing those and finding the right tools about how to, foster and nurture really good relationships.
But I also think you can experiment.
Yeah,
works.
That's what I'm saying. But the fact is, put yourself in the position to try and
learn. No, certainly, because I think when we look at relationships, we're just like, okay, if that person doesn't do that, then I'm not going to do that. And it's just like,
no, we're not going to get very far with that mentality.
We're not. And I think we really need, people who are introverts may find it a lot harder. And I think, there are ways that you can still make friends.
100%.
There are ways that you can still build connection. It might not look in the same way like everyone else's, but there are things that you can do
100%
that you can contribute to, even if it's, letting people know, look, I'm not a texter. Like, you might have long responses. That is you letting people know, like, this is how I would respond, or this is how I may be in a particular relationship. And it's down to the other person whether they accept that or not.
Sure.
But that's on them. That has nothing to do with you. But just experiment and see what works and what doesn't. And relationships can be very tricky.
Understatement of the century there. Thank you.
Very tricky.
But I think this is a good place to kind of take stock and, like, just pause on here, because I know we're going to explore probably quite a few of these elements in some of our kind of, like, forthcoming conversations after this about the intricacies. But I think what to leave on a good note of encouragement is, like, lean into, like, what relationships will do. Lean into, like, these are spaces of learning and personal self-development and growth.
100%.
Because really, if it'll be down to you, but it can be the place where you get the most benefit from in so many ways.
But also take accountability.
100%.
Because when it's a two-way street, you need to learn when to take accountability in those relationships. So if you haven't heard from a friend, family, or colleague that you usually speak to, reach out. It's not going to cost you much to call, send a message, or send a Teams message, or whatever it may be. Just reach out, because you may not know what that person may be going through, and they don't have to tell you, but just knowing that you're there, but also being visible when something happens, that's probably more appreciated than people like texting every day. Just being there when they really need you when times are tough. And I think relationships can be as simple as that sometimes.
I love it. And I would just say, like, lean into the scope and the landscape of what relationships will do. In that space, like you said, you learn about, where am I in terms of, am I being responsible for my part? Am I also assessing, like, if I can see that these interactions are taking so much more from me, I may need to have another reevaluation moment. But lean into that space of discovery. I think 100%. That's what we're saying. 100%. Well, I think we're going to end it there.
Well, this has been great. I look forward to the rest.